Get comfortable and let your shoulders drop. Tonight we're going to a small town outside Richmond, Virginia, where a retired widower named Frank Delaney agreed to keep one old dog for one weekend and spent the next 3 years discovering how unreliable the word temporary can be. This is not a story about rescuing an animal with love alone. Love is useful, but old dogs also require veterinary care, washable rugs, medication hidden in cheese, and someone willing to stand in wet grass at 2 in the morning while saying, with diminishing sincerity, "Take your time." There is no villain here. Only a crowded shelter, a lonely man, a gray-muzzled hound named Biscuit, and a series of reasonable decisions that got completely out of hand. Frank was 69 when his daughter convinced him to foster. He had retired 4 years earlier after 37 years as a city bus mechanic. His wife, Evelyn, had died the following winter, and since then his days had become precise enough to inspect with a ruler. He woke at 6:10, coffee at 6:15, the local paper at the kitchen table, a walk around the block before 8, weather permitting, and before 9 when weather did not. On Tuesdays, he played cards at the Veterans Hall, though he had never served and the hall welcomed neighborhood seniors for daytime programs. Thursdays were groceries. Saturdays, he changed something in the house that did not need changing. Frank's garage was immaculate. Wrenches hung in size order. Coffee cans held labeled fasteners. The lawnmower started on the first pole because failure would have embarrassed it. Inside the house, 2 mugs remained in the cabinet above the sink. Frank's plain navy mug and Evelyn's white one painted with yellow lemons. He had stopped using hers, but he had not moved it. His daughter, Nora, lived 40 minutes away with her husband and 2 sons. She called every evening. Frank loved her, which did not prevent him from treating each call as an attempted inspection. "Did you eat?" she would ask. "Every day so far." "Did you go anywhere?" "Mailbox. Very exclusive." "Dad." Nora. The fostering idea began during a thunderstorm in June. The county animal shelter lost power in one wing, and a pipe leak forced staff to move several dogs. Nora volunteered there twice a month. She called Frank at 7 on Friday evening and asked whether he could keep one quiet senior dog until Monday. "No," Frank said. "You haven't heard the details." "I heard dog. House-trained, calm, sleeps most of the day. Those are sales terms. He needs a dry place for one weekend." Frank looked through his kitchen window. Rain struck the patio hard enough to bounce. In the background of Nora's call, dogs barked and metal doors clanged. "What kind?" he asked. Nora knew she had won, but respected him enough not to say it. "Old hound mix, about 12. His name is Biscuit." "That's not a name, that's a breakfast item." "I'll bring his food." She arrived 40 minutes later with a dog who looked older than 12 and less temporary than promised. Biscuit was brown and white, though most of the brown had faded around his face. One ear stood halfway up, while the other folded forward. His back curved slightly, his toenails clicked on the floor, and he carried the solemn expression of a county judge hearing disappointing testimony. He entered Frank's spotless kitchen, sniffed one chair leg, and lay down directly across the doorway. "He's in the way," Frank said. "He likes to know where people are. He knows. I'm behind him, unable to leave the room." Nora unpacked measured food, a soft bed, an old towel, medication, and a typed instruction sheet. Biscuit had arthritis and early kidney disease. He needed pills with breakfast, frequent access to water, no long stairs, and short walks rather than long ones. A veterinary appointment was already scheduled for the following week. Frank read every line. "You said, quiet." As if summoned, Biscuit released one deep hound bark at the refrigerator. "Mostly quiet," Nora said. The power returned at the shelter Saturday morning, but weekend foster homes were asked to keep animals until Monday so staff could repair the damaged wing. Frank agreed because that had been the arrangement. He did not agree because Biscuit had slept beside his bed, though not on the dog bed. The dog preferred Frank's discarded work shirt, which had fallen from a laundry basket. At 6:10 Saturday, Biscuit stood when Frank stood. At 6:15, he watched coffee preparation. During the paper, he rested his chin on Frank's slipper and sighed whenever a page turned too loudly. Frank measured the food exactly. He hid the arthritis pill in a cube of cheddar. Biscuit swallowed the cheese and deposited the clean pill on the linoleum. Frank tried again with peanut butter. Biscuit licked it off and left the pill shining. "You understand the assignment," Frank said. Biscuit sneezed. Frank crushed no medication without veterinary approval. He called Nora, who called the shelter, which confirmed the tablet could be wrapped in a small piece of canned food. Biscuit accepted that arrangement as if he had designed the escalation. Their first walk lasted 8 minutes and covered half a block. Biscuit inspected every mailbox post with the care Frank once gave brake assemblies. At the corner, he stopped and refused to continue. "Home is that way," Frank said. Biscuit looked the other way. "You came from the shelter. You have no regional expertise." Biscuit sat. Frank waited. A neighbor named Mrs. Chen passed with pruning shears and asked if he had gotten a dog. "Borrowed," Frank said. "He's lovely." "He's obstructing traffic." Mrs. Chen scratched Biscuit behind the folded ear. The dog rose immediately and followed her toward Frank's house. "Traitor," Frank said. By Sunday, Biscuit had located every cool patch of floor, learned the sound of the cheese drawer, and established that Frank's recliner was not available, but the rug beside it was. Frank moved the dog bed there without comment. That afternoon, thunder rolled. Biscuit began pacing before the rain arrived. His breath quickened. He tried to push behind the toilet, then into the narrow space beside the washing machine. Frank recognized mechanical panic easily. He was less practiced with fear. He closed the curtains, turned on the radio, and sat on the laundry floor while Biscuit pressed his entire trembling body against Frank's hip. "Storm can't get in here," Frank said. It was not logically persuasive. Biscuit shook harder. Frank put one hand over the dog's shoulder and began naming tools from his garage in order of drawer. 1/4-inch sockets, 3/8 sockets, extensions, ratchets, torque wrenches. He kept his voice even until the thunder moved east and Biscuit's breathing slowed. Evelyn had feared thunderstorms too, though she pretended otherwise. She would clean the kitchen during every storm, moving brightly from counter to counter while never standing near a window. Frank used to complain that she made noise when he was trying to hear the weather report. Sitting on the laundry floor, he wished he had understood sooner that her noise had been a request for company. Monday morning, Nora arrived with a leash. Biscuit was asleep on Frank's work shirt beside the recliner. Frank had washed the shirt and placed it there again. "Shelter's ready," Nora said. "Good." She clipped on the leash. Biscuit rose slowly and followed her to the door. At the threshold, he looked back once. Frank stood with both hands in his pockets. "Go on." The door closed. The house became quiet in a way Frank had once believed he wanted. He found a water drip beside the bowl, a white hair on his navy sock, half a cube of cheese on the counter. He cleaned all 3. Then he sat down with the paper and read the same paragraph 4 times. At noon, Nora texted a photograph. Biscuit was back in his shelter kennel, curled tightly on a plastic bed. The caption said he had eaten but would not come to the front. Frank did not answer. At 2, he reorganized screwdrivers. At 3, he changed the furnace filter 3 months early. At 4:10, he called the shelter. "This is Frank Delaney," he said. "I had Biscuit over the weekend." A staff member named Tasha recognized the name. "He did well with you. Thank you for helping us out." "What's his situation?" Biscuit had been surrendered after his owner entered assisted living. He had been at the shelter nearly 4 months. Several families met him, but most wanted younger dogs, and one adopter returned him after 2 days because he paced at night and had an accident. "He's available for adoption," Tasha said, "but we don't pressure fosters. Even another short break would help." Frank looked at the empty rug. "How short?" "Whatever you can offer." "That's not a unit." Tasha laughed. "A week?" Frank drove to the shelter with Biscuit's bed in the trunk because the shelter had forgotten it at his house. That was the explanation he gave himself. Biscuit heard Frank before he saw him. The old dog's head lifted. He came to the kennel gate with a stiffness that became a trot for the last few feet. Frank crouched, which his knees objected to, and put his fingers through the chain link. "1 week," he said. Biscuit leaned his gray muzzle into Frank's hand. The second foster agreement was written for 7 days. Frank read the contract, asked about emergency veterinary authorization, and insisted Nora be listed as backup. Tasha added a note that Frank might extend if placement had not been found. Might, Frank said. Underlined, Tasha promised. The week established that Biscuit was not entirely house-trained, did not sleep most of the day, and had strong opinions about delivery trucks. He could not climb into Frank's sedan without help. He snored like a lawnmower losing compression. Every evening at 7, he stood by the pantry because his previous owner must have distributed a snack at that hour. Frank bought washable runners for the hallway. He built a low ramp for the back step from scrap plywood and added non-slip strips. He placed a second water bowl in the bedroom, then complained to Nora that the dog had too many facilities. "You installed them," she said. Under protest. Biscuit's veterinary visit revealed manageable problems, not magical ones. Arthritis in both hips, reduced kidney function requiring a prescription diet and periodic blood work. A dental infection that needed treatment once lab results confirmed anesthesia could be approached safely. A fatty lump on his shoulder that the veterinarian measured and planned to monitor. Dr. Maya Patel spoke plainly. Biscuit was an old dog. Nobody could promise years. The goal was comfort, mobility, hydration, and attention to changes. "What's the cost?" Frank asked. She gave him estimates before proceeding. The shelter's medical fund covered the exam and part of the dental work. Frank would not be financially responsible as a foster unless he chose unapproved care, but he needed to call the shelter before non-emergency treatment. Frank disliked the phrase medical fund. It sounded finite. At home, he began a notebook. Food, water, medication, walk length, appetite. He recorded one instance of vomiting with the same clarity he once used for brake pressure readings. Dr. Patel approved. Nora called it the Biscuit maintenance log. "Living things are not machines," Frank said. "You have his bowel movements in a table." Machines don't have those, usually. On the 7th day, nobody called about an adopter. Frank did not call the shelter either. On the 9th, Tasha phoned to ask whether he could keep Biscuit through the weekend. Frank said the dog had already disrupted 2 weeks, and another 3 days would make no measurable difference. On the 14th, he returned to the shelter for food. A volunteer asked how his foster was doing. "Temporary," Frank said. The volunteer looked at the new leash, orthopedic harness, and bag of kidney support treats Frank was carrying. Clearly. Biscuit changed Frank's schedule by inches. The 6:15 coffee remained, but now he opened the back door first. The morning walk slowed from exercise to observation. Frank began noticing which yards had rabbits, where rain collected, and when Mrs. Chen's roses opened. People spoke to him because of the dog. Children asked Biscuit's name. Delivery drivers carried treats. At the Veterans Hall, Frank was no longer simply the quiet mechanic at the end of the card table. He was the man with the old hound, who waited in the shaded patio area with a water bowl. Biscuit had no tricks. He did not fetch, roll over, or offer a paw. He knew sit when motivated, and understood come as a topic for negotiation. But he possessed one rare skill. He could identify the person in a room who least wanted attention and rest his head on that person's knee. At cards, that person was usually Frank's friend Leon Brooks, a retired school custodian who claimed dogs made his eyes itch. Biscuit leaned against him every Tuesday. Leon complained while scratching the dog's ear for 2 hours. "Allergies," Leon said when Frank noticed. "Your hand is causing them." Medical mystery. 1 month passed, then 2. The shelter posted Biscuit online with photographs Nora took in Frank's yard. In the best one, Biscuit lay beneath the hydrangeas Evelyn had planted, with his good ear raised and the other folded. The description called him a distinguished gentleman seeking a quiet retirement home. Frank objected to distinguished. He ate a paper towel yesterday. "That's not going in the profile," Nora said. 3 adoption inquiries arrived. The first family lived in an apartment up 2 flights of stairs. Tasha explained why it was not the right match. The second had a young dog whose energetic greeting overwhelmed Biscuit during the meeting. No blame, just the wrong household. The third inquiry came from a woman named Celia Ward, who lived 20 minutes away. She had owned senior beagles and worked from home. Her fenced yard was level. Her veterinary reference was excellent. On paper, Celia was perfect. Frank received the news on a Wednesday morning. Tasha sounded pleased. They would arrange a meet and greet Saturday. If it went well, Biscuit could begin a trial adoption. That's the point, Frank said. It is. Good. He wrote the appointment in his notebook. For the rest of the day, he repaired things: the loose hinge on the shed, the latch on Nora's old bedroom window, a drawer that had stuck since Evelyn was alive and that she had specifically asked him not to fix because she kept birthday gifts behind it. At 7, Biscuit stood by the pantry. Frank gave him the approved kidney support treat and said, "Don't get used to it." The dog had been used to it for 9 weeks. Saturday arrived bright and mild. Frank brushed Biscuit on the patio, cleaned his folded ear, and packed a tote with medication, food, the maintenance notebook, the washed work shirt, and a 2-page list of observations. Nora found him adding a 3rd page. "Dad, Celia is meeting him, not applying for a security clearance. She needs to know the back step has to be dry. He slips when he turns left." "You wrote that twice. Then she won't miss it." The meet and greet took place in the shelter's fenced garden. Celia Ward arrived early in sneakers and sat sideways on a bench rather than approaching Biscuit head-on. She was 61, soft-spoken, and carried no bag of random treats. She let Biscuit sniff her hand, then scratched the exact place behind his folded ear. Biscuit leaned against her leg. Frank disliked how quickly he did it. Celia asked sensible questions. How often did he need to go outside at night? Did thunder medication help? Which veterinary clinic had his records? What signs suggested his arthritis was worse? She had already priced the prescription diet and shown Tasha photographs of her fenced yard. "My last beagle made it to 15, she said. "I know the good part is still the good part, even when it comes with pill boxes." Frank could find nothing wrong with her. This felt unfair. They walked Biscuit around the garden. Celia matched his pace. When he stopped at a patch of clover for nearly a minute, she waited instead of tugging the leash. Frank had planned to explain that patience was required, but she had brought her own. Tasha suggested a home visit the following afternoon. Frank could come and help Biscuit explore. If everyone felt comfortable, a trial adoption would begin Monday and last 1 week before paperwork became final. "A week," Frank said. "Nothing is irreversible tomorrow," Tasha told him. Celia looked at Frank rather than at the shelter staff. "If he doesn't settle, I won't force it. And you can call me. You clearly know him." Frank nodded. "He needs his water changed twice a day, even if it looks clean. Hair gets in it." "It's on page 1, Celia said gently. At home that evening, Biscuit slept with his chin on Frank's slipper. Frank turned the television low and watched none of it. He thought about Evelyn's last months, though he tried not to. She had wanted hospice care at home once treatment no longer helped. Frank had agreed with the doctors and then behaved as if enough vigilance could renegotiate the decision. He recorded every dose and temperature. He adjusted pillows, argued with delivery companies, and slept in a chair beside her bed. He had been useful every minute. After she died, usefulness vanished before grief did. Nora brought food he did not need. Friends offered company he did not know how to accept. The house required little from him, and Frank repaired it until there was nothing left but maintenance of things already working. Biscuit had made him useful again. That did not mean the dog belonged to him. Frank repeated this conclusion several times. Each time it sounded less convincing. Sunday's home visit went perfectly. Celia's house was a 1-story brick ranch with rugs over the hardwood floors and a ramp from the sunroom to a fenced yard. A covered patio offered shade. 2 orthopedic beds waited inside, though Celia apologized for buying them before the adoption was certain. Biscuit inspected the kitchen, drank from the new bowl, and fell asleep beneath her desk while the adults discussed medication. "He likes it here," Nora said on the drive home. Frank watched Biscuit in the back seat. "He likes floors. Most houses have them." "You can say this is hard." "It is not hard. It's successful fostering." Nora kept her eyes on the road. "Okay. That tone is unnecessary. I said okay. You said it diagnostically. Monday morning, Frank drove Biscuit to Celia's house for the trial. He carried in the food, medication, beds Biscuit had ignored, and Evelyn's old kitchen timer, which he used so he would not forget the evening pill. Celia held it carefully. Don't you need this? I have another. That was not true. He could buy another. Biscuit wandered to the sunroom. Frank crouched beside him and adjusted the collar, even though it fit. Be polite, he said. No paper towels. Don't bark at the ice maker. Biscuit licked his chin. Frank stood too quickly and put one hand on the wall. He told Celia to call if the dog refused food, seemed restless, limped more than usual, drank less, drank more, coughed, paced, stared at a wall, or behaved differently in any manner she considered relevant. I will, she promised. He left before Biscuit could watch him go. The first day, Celia sent 3 photographs. Biscuit asleep under the desk. Biscuit in the yard. Biscuit accepting his evening medication on the first attempt, an achievement Frank considered suspicious. The second day, she reported that he had paced after midnight but settled when she put his work shirt beside the bed. The third day, she sent a video of Biscuit rolling halfway onto his back in the grass. Frank watched it 7 times and answered, "Good." His routine returned. Coffee, paper, fast walk, cards, groceries. The house remained cleaner without paw prints and louder without snoring. At 7 each evening, Frank looked toward the pantry. On Thursday, Tasha called. "How are you doing?" "I'm not the one being adopted." "I know. That's why I asked." "Celia is qualified. Biscuit is comfortable. The arrangement is functioning." "That's good." "Yes." Neither spoke for a moment. Tasha said, "Fosters are allowed to grieve when an animal gets adopted. It doesn't mean you made the wrong choice." "I am not grieving." "What would you call it?" Frank looked at the folded ramp leaning unused beside the back step. "Reduced household noise." Tasha accepted that phrase without argument. On Friday afternoon, Celia called directly. Biscuit had stopped eating breakfast, then vomited after drinking water. She had already contacted the shelter and Dr. Patel. They were on the way to the clinic. Frank was in his car before she finished the sentence. At the veterinary hospital, Biscuit lay on a blanket in an exam room with Celia beside him. He lifted his head when Frank entered and tried to stand. Frank knelt and put both hands around the dog's face. "No heroics," he said. "Stay down." Blood work showed dehydration and changes in kidney values. An ultrasound ruled out an obstruction. Biscuit needed fluids, anti-nausea medication, and observation overnight. Dr. Patel explained each step. This might be a manageable flare or a sign that the kidney disease was progressing. They would know more in the morning. Celia's eyes filled. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Dr. Patel said. "You noticed quickly and called. That's exactly right." Frank knew that too. He had read the water log Celia brought. She had recorded every meal and bathroom trip in handwriting neater than his own. Still, a sour, irrational part of him wanted a mistake he could correct. Instead, he sat beside her in the waiting room. "He does this thing with pills," Frank said. "Takes the food and drops the tablet." "He hasn't done it with me." "Show off." Celia laughed weakly. At 9, a technician told them Biscuit had settled and was receiving fluids. There was no reason for either person to spend the night in a plastic chair. The clinic would call with any change. Frank drove home carrying Biscuit's work shirt, which the clinic had not needed. Rain began before he reached the highway. By the time he entered the house, thunder was moving in from the west. He stood in the laundry room and remembered the old dog pressed against him on the floor. For years after Evelyn died, Frank had believed the worst part of loving someone was the helplessness at the end. Biscuit had revealed a second difficulty. Love could make you helpless long before the end, on an ordinary Friday, while somebody you trusted did everything correctly. At 2 in the morning, the clinic's overnight technician called. Biscuit was resting. No vomiting. His hydration was improving. Frank thanked her, put down the phone, and remained awake until dawn. The turning point came in the veterinary parking lot Saturday morning. Dr. Patel said Biscuit could go home. His kidney values had improved with fluids, though they would need to recheck them. He required a temporary medication change and encouragement to eat. The immediate crisis had passed. Celia sat in her car with both hands around the steering wheel. Frank expected relief. Instead, she asked him to stay outside while Tasha brought Biscuit to the discharge area. "I need to tell you something before I see him," she said. Frank waited. "I can manage his care. I want to. But all week he listened for your car. Every time a sedan slowed near the house, he got up. At night, he carried that shirt from the bedroom to the front door." Frank looked toward the clinic entrance. Celia continued. "He was kind to me. He trusted me. But I'm not home to him. You are." "Dogs adjust." "They do. And if you don't want him permanently, I will keep trying. I mean that. This isn't a threat or a guilt trip. But I need to ask whether you're letting him go because it's best for him or because you're scared of what keeping him will cost you." Frank's face hardened. "You don't know me." "No, I know the dog. And I know I nearly adopted a senior beagle once because her foster was afraid to admit he'd already become her person. He kept her. I adopted another dog." Nobody lost. Tasha came through the doors with Biscuit walking slowly beside her. The hound saw Frank. His folded ear lifted. His tail moved once, then twice. He crossed the pavement as fast as aching hips allowed, passed Celia without hesitation, and pressed his forehead against Frank's knee. Frank put one hand on the dog's back. "This proves nothing," he said, but his voice had changed. Tasha looked at Celia. Celia looked at the sky. Both women possessed excellent survival instincts. Frank crouched and checked Biscuit's eyes, gums, harness, and discharge bandage. Biscuit leaned so heavily that Frank had to brace one hand on the pavement. "You caused an unnecessary amount of paperwork," he told him. Biscuit sighed. The trial adoption ended by mutual agreement. Celia hugged Biscuit, gave Frank both new beds, and promised to send the special bowls she had ordered. There was no failure in it. She had given an old dog a safe week and paid attention closely enough to understand where he belonged. At the shelter, Frank signed an adoption application. Tasha tried to maintain professional composure. This asks whether the home is permanent as any home can be. And your relationship to the animal? Frank looked down at Biscuit, who was asleep across both of Frank's shoes. Obstructive. Tasha wrote owner. Because shelter policy required a final review, the adoption did not become official until Monday. Frank used the weekend to install a better ramp, move one rug, and add Biscuit's name to the emergency card on his refrigerator. Nora came Sunday with a bag from the pet store and found her father mounting a small wooden sign over the leash hook. "Biscuit," it read. "Temporary?" she asked. "The sign is removable." She hugged him before he could object. On Monday, Frank paid the adoption fee. The shelter waived part of it for a senior animal, but Frank donated the same amount back to the medical fund. Tasha handed him a folder, a tag, and a photograph taken in the shelter garden. "You're officially a failed foster," she said. Frank examined the phrase. "Sounds incompetent." "It's a compliment." "Poor terminology." Biscuit barked once at the front desk. Frank attached the new tag. "Deal is permanent," he said. Within actuarial limits. The first months of official ownership looked almost identical to fostering, which surprised Frank. There was no music, no sudden transformation, no moment when grief vacated the house and happiness took its room. There was breakfast, medication, walks, vet appointments, mud on the floor, the evening treat at 7. There were also small changes no contract could list. Frank began using Evelyn's lemon mug again, not for coffee, but to hold Biscuit's toothbrush and ear-cleaning gauze beside the sink. The first time Nora saw it, she said nothing. He placed a photograph of Biscuit on the piano beside one of Evelyn. In the photograph, the dog was asleep with his mouth slightly open. Frank claimed it was temporary until Nora took a better one. It stayed. Biscuit became a neighborhood institution. Mrs. Chen saved cucumber ends for him until Dr. Patel explained they were safe only in moderation. Leon bought a dog bed for the Veterans Hall and denied doing so. Children on Frank's street learned to approach slowly and let Biscuit sniff first. The old hound had good days and slower days. On slower mornings, Frank shortened the route. He built a small wheeled cart after Biscuit tired halfway home once, but Dr. Patel recommended a properly fitted mobility stroller instead of Frank's prototype with lawnmower wheels and uncertain steering. "It has bearings," Frank objected. "It also has a bungee cord where a safety harness should be." Frank purchased the approved stroller, then replaced 2 rattling fasteners on principle. Biscuit rode only when tired. He sat with his head above the side, one ear folded and the other catching wind. Strangers smiled. Frank pretended not to notice. Autumn arrived, then winter. During the first snowfall, Biscuit stepped into the yard, looked at the white ground, and returned inside without completing his business. Frank put on boots, shoveled a narrow path through 2 inches of snow, and escorted him to the hydrangeas. "Your ancestors lived outdoors," Frank said. Biscuit stared at the cleared path until Frank widened it. At Christmas, Nora's family came for dinner. Her sons placed a wrapped gift beside Biscuit's bed. Inside was a red bandana printed with small white biscuits. Frank said no animal of his would wear novelty clothing. In every family photograph that evening, Biscuit wore the bandana. By spring, Frank had been leaving the house more often than at any point since Evelyn died. Biscuit needed veterinary checks, food pickups, gentle walks in different parks, and occasional shelter events where adopted seniors were invited back for photographs. At one event, Tasha asked whether Frank could speak with a man considering a 13-year-old terrier. "Why me?" "Because you ask practical questions and don't pretend old dogs are easy." Frank met the man beside the kennels. He explained medication costs, night pacing, ramps, and the value of washable rugs. Then he described the 7 o'clock pantry ritual and Biscuit's habit of resting on shoes. The man adopted the terrier the next day. A week later, Tasha called Frank with another question. The shelter needed experienced short-term foster homes for senior dogs recovering from dental procedures. Biscuit was calm with other dogs during meetings. Would Frank consider keeping a small dog for 3 nights? "No," Frank said. Tasha waited. "What kind?" he asked. Her name was Mabel, a 14-year-old Chihuahua mix weighing 9 pounds and equipped with the personality of a much larger animal. She arrived after dental surgery, wearing a soft recovery collar and a pink sweater supplied by a volunteer. Frank removed the sweater within 30 seconds. Mabel bit the air near his thumb. "Good reflexes," he said. Biscuit watched from his rug with an expression of grave concern. The shelter provided medication, food, written instructions, and a crate. Frank prepared a separate resting area behind a baby gate so the dogs could see and smell each other without forced contact. Introductions happened outside on neutral ground, with Nora holding Mabel's leash and Frank walking Biscuit. Mabel barked 6 times. Biscuit sniffed a dandelion. By the second evening, they slept on opposite sides of the gate. On the third morning, Mabel pushed a toy beneath it. Biscuit examined the toy, then rested his chin on it. Frank recorded the exchange in both animals' logs while denying it had emotional significance. Mabel returned to the shelter on schedule and was adopted 2 weeks later by a retired librarian who admired strong opinions. Frank told Tasha the arrangement had been tolerable. The next foster was Otis, a nearly blind spaniel who needed 10 quiet days after treatment for an ear infection. Then came Pearl, a heavy-set beagle whose diet plan she opposed through direct action. Frank installed a second gate, purchased more washable runners, and turned the unused breakfast nook into what Nora called the senior suite. "It is a containment area," he corrected. A small chalkboard appeared beside the refrigerator. Biscuit occupied the top line permanently. Beneath it, Frank wrote each foster's name, medications, mealtimes, and shelter contact. Evelyn's lemon mug moved to a higher shelf after Pearl attempted to drink from it. Biscuit proved an excellent host. He did not play with newcomers or share his bed. He simply showed them the rhythm of the house. Back door in the morning, water bowls in the kitchen, quiet after lunch, treat at 7. When a frightened dog paced, Biscuit settled nearby without crowding it. Frank began to understand why Tasha had asked him. The old hound had become the calm center of a rotating little world. Not every foster fit. A senior shepherd named Duke became anxious in Frank's small house and guarded doorways from Biscuit. Frank called the shelter after the first tense evening rather than attempting to prove he could fix it. Tasha moved Duke to a farm foster with more space and no other dogs. Returning him feels wrong, Frank said when she arrived. Moving him to the home that suits him is the job, Tasha replied. Fostering isn't a test of how much difficulty you can endure. Frank wrote that sentence in the front of his maintenance notebook. He learned other limits. He could safely handle one foster at a time, only dogs under 40 pounds unless Nora helped, and no animal requiring lifted transfers because his back was no longer negotiable. He kept emergency numbers visible and never improvised medication. He took breaks between placements. The boundaries did not reduce his usefulness. They made it sustainable. A year after Biscuit's adoption, the shelter asked Frank to help build 6 portable ramps for other senior foster homes. He drew a simple design with side rails, outdoor-grade material, non-slip surface, and adjustable height. The shelter's maintenance supervisor reviewed it before volunteers began construction. Frank ran the workshop in his garage. Leon came, claiming he had been misled into believing there would be cards. Mrs. Chen brought dumplings. Nora's sons painted small paw prints along the side rails after Frank approved low VOC exterior paint and made them measure twice. Celia Ward arrived carrying a drill. Frank had not seen her since the failed trial. She had adopted a 10-year-old beagle named Rosie from the shelter 3 months later. Rosie entered the garage, found Biscuit, and lay beside him as if they had arranged the meeting. "I heard you needed help," Celia said. Frank handed her a box of screws. "These are sorted by length. Keep them that way." "Page 1?" He looked at her and smiled. The ramps went to 6 homes. One allowed an arthritic poodle to reach a porch without being carried. Another helped a foster named Sam move a dog recovering from surgery. Frank requested photographs only to verify the angles, though everyone understood he was collecting them. That summer, Biscuit's kidney disease progressed. The change was gradual. More water, less appetite, longer recovery after walks. Blood work confirmed what Dr. Patel had warned them might come. She adjusted the care plan and talked with Frank about quality of life before there was a crisis. They made a list together. Biscuit's good things were food, slow walks, greeting Nora, lying near Frank, the 7 o'clock treat, and sniffing Mrs. Chen's roses. Pain that could not be controlled, persistent nausea, inability to rest, and loss of interest in those things would matter more than any single lab number. Frank copied the list into the notebook. "I don't want to wait too long," he said. "And you don't have to decide today," Dr. Patel replied. "We'll keep talking." For several months, medication and diet changes helped. Biscuit walked less but rode more in the stroller. He continued supervising fosters from his rug. Frank declined placements during weeks when Biscuit needed extra attention, and the shelter never questioned it. One October morning, Biscuit refused breakfast and the pantry treat. He tried to stand, could not settle, and looked at Frank with an exhaustion that no nap had fixed. Frank called Dr. Patel. The exam showed pain and nausea despite medication. More treatment might have bought a little time in a hospital cage, but it was unlikely to restore the things on Biscuit's list. Dr. Patel presented the options without rushing him. Frank sat on the clinic floor. Biscuit rested his gray muzzle across Frank's thigh. "He hates storms," Frank said. "I remember. And delivery trucks." "Yes. Paper towels aren't safe around him." Dr. Patel waited. Frank placed one hand behind the folded ear. "I think we're at too long if I make him do more for me." Nora came. Leon came too and waited outside because he said somebody needed to watch the car. The clinic prepared a quiet room with a blanket, dim lights, and all the time Frank needed. Biscuit ate one small piece of cheese, the ordinary kind he had always preferred to veterinary inventions. Frank talked to him through the sedative, naming garage tools in drawer order just as he had during their first storm. 1/4-inch sockets, 3/8 sockets, extensions, ratchets, torque wrenches. Biscuit's body softened. His breathing became slow and easy. Dr. Patel gave the final medication only after Frank nodded. The old hound died with his head in Frank's lap and Nora's hand on his back. Frank cried without hiding it. Grief did not feel smaller because Biscuit was a dog. It felt different from losing Evelyn, but difference was not a ranking. He carried Biscuit's collar home in his coat pocket. The house was quiet again. The ramp remained at the back step, the bowls stood empty, and 7 o'clock arrived with no one waiting at the pantry. For 3 weeks, Frank accepted no foster calls. He drank coffee, read the paper, walked quickly around the block, and disliked reaching home so soon. He put Biscuit's photograph beside Evelyn's and placed the red bandana beneath it. Tasha sent one message. "No pressure. Your place on the foster list stays open as long as you want." Frank did not answer until the 4th week. A cold rain had begun. He was in the garage replacing a worn hinge on one of the portable ramps when he noticed a shallow tooth mark in the wood, left by Pearl during her stay. On the shelf stood Mabel's spare food bowl, Otis's soft nightlight, and the maintenance notebook filled with names that had passed through his house safely. Biscuit was gone. The place he had taught Frank how to make was still there. Frank called the shelter. "This is Frank Delaney," he said. "I am not ready for a dog that looks like Biscuit." Tasha answered gently, "Understood." And no large dogs, no lifted transfers, nothing with more than 4 medications unless you send a pill organizer. "Understood." "Is there anybody quiet who needs 3 nights?" There was. A 15-year-old miniature poodle named Walter needed a warm place while his foster family attended a funeral. He was black, curly, nearly deaf, and wore a blue sweater without shame. He slept most of the day, exactly as advertised, and regarded Frank as acceptable kitchen staff. On Walter's first night, rain tapped the windows. Frank sat in his recliner with the poodle asleep on the rug beside him. The spot was not Biscuit's anymore, because love does not reserve furniture forever. It was simply a place another tired animal could rest. Frank still missed Biscuit. He missed the toenails in the hallway, the obstructed doorways, and the warm weight on his slipper. Taking another foster did not replace any of it. It gave the grief somewhere useful to stand. Here's the update. 3 years after that first stormy weekend, Frank is 72 and remains a foster volunteer. He has hosted 17 senior dogs, including Biscuit. 12 moved to adoptive homes. 2 transferred to foster settings that suited them better. 2 stayed with Frank for comfort care until their deaths, supported by the shelter and veterinary team. 1 is currently asleep in the senior suite, which Frank still calls a containment area. Her name is Dottie. She is a 13-year-old dachshund with heart disease, excellent medication tolerance, and a tendency to steal socks. Her approved adopter is coming Sunday. Frank has prepared a 2-page care summary and is attempting to keep it from becoming 3. He has not adopted another dog permanently. Maybe he will someday, and maybe he won't. Failed foster was 1 chapter, not an obligation to repeat the ending. His role now is to be the safe middle, the quiet house between shelter noise and a permanent home. Celia volunteers with him twice a month. Leon handles ramp hardware and continues to report dog-related allergies while carrying treats in his pocket. Mrs. Chen sends cucumber ends only after consulting the posted diet sheet. Nora still calls every evening. "Did you eat?" she asks. "Every day so far." "Did you go anywhere?" Frank looks at the chalkboard, the leash by the door, and the latest foster sleeping beneath the photograph of Biscuit under Evelyn's hydrangeas. "Busy day," he says. The county shelter now gives new senior fosters a small booklet Frank helped write. It contains practical things. Protect slippery floors. Ask before changing medication. Expect nighttime adjustment. Keep records. Know your lifting limits. And call early when something changes. The last page has 1 sentence Tasha insisted on including under Frank's name. Temporary does not mean unimportant. Frank argued that the sentence was sentimental. Then he underlined it. Biscuit's wooden sign remains above the original leash hook in the kitchen. Beneath it hang temporary tags with changing names. Frank does not remove the permanent sign because every foster in the house follows a route Biscuit discovered first. Through the back door, down the safe ramp, past the hydrangeas, and home again at the pace an old body can manage. At 7 each evening, Frank opens the pantry. One approved treat goes to whichever dog is waiting there. For half a second, he still expects to see one folded ear and one raised ear, a gray muzzle, and the solemn face of a judge, disappointed by the speed of service. That half second hurts. It also makes him smile. Biscuit was never just one old dog, and the weekend was never merely temporary. He was the reason a widower opened the quiet house, learned to accept uncertain love, and kept the door open after saying goodbye. So let your own room grow quiet now. Somewhere outside Richmond, a small chalkboard carries a dog's name and 4 medication times. A ramp waits at the back step. A retired mechanic has set his alarm for a midnight bathroom trip and placed a fresh towel by the door because rain is coming. And on the rug beside his chair, an old dog who does not yet know where home will be is sleeping as if, for tonight, she does. If this story kept you company, you can leave a like and subscribe for the next one. Before you drift off, tell me this. Could you foster an old dog, knowing goodbye is part of the job? Or would you end up signing the adoption papers, too? Share your state and age as well. I like knowing where these stories find you. Sleep well. I'll see you in the next one.